The Greenhorn's Auction. The auction block's raw-hewn timbers loomed impossibly high beneath Silas's scuffed boots, each knot and splinter a silent indictment of his greenness. Redemption's dusty square baked under the midday sun, its unforgiving glare magnifying the townspeople's scrutinizing stares. A low hum, like a hive of agitated bees, buzzed through the gathering, peppered by sporadic snickers. A flush ignited his cheeks, a fiery blush defying the crisp desert air. He shifted, hands clenching, then releasing. His prized Stetson, usually a comfort, now pressed like a crown of ignominy. He, Silas Meadowsweet, was up for auction, not for transgression or debt, but simply for being a verdant sprout among weathered oaks, a cowboy fueled more by earnest hope than by hard-won skill. The whispers, though not overtly cruel, stung like nettles. Never even branded a calf, heard he can barely rope a fence post, pretty face, but can he work? Old Man Hemlock, the auctioneer, a barrel-chested man with a voice like a bullfrog in spring, clapped his hands, the sound a sharp crack through the murmurs. "All right, folks. Let's get this show on the road. You all know Silas Meadowsweet here." Hemlock swept a grand gesture toward Silas, who yearned for the earth to cleave and swallow him. Strong back, willing heart, and eager to learn. "What am I bid for a year of good, honest labor?" A scattering of lackluster coughs was his reply. Silas fixated on a gnarled knot in the wooden platform, tracing its convoluted lines as if deciphering its secrets held the key to his survival. The expectant hush that followed Hemlock's plea was worse than any taunt, the sound of utter disregard, of no one envisioning a future for him. Hemlock cleared his throat, his booming voice losing a fraction of its usual bluster. "Come on now, folks. A good hand is hard to find. This young man's got potential, I tell ya. Who'll start us off at, say, $5 a month?" A wiry rancher at the forefront, his face a map of sun-baked leather, spat a stream of tobacco. $5? For a man who needs teachin' everything? I'll give you 3, and that's generous. Another, a gruffer voice, piped up, heard he ain't even seen a woman up close. Might be more trouble than he's worth. A crude, derisive ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Silas's face burned anew. The pounding in his ears drowned out the auctioneer's flustered attempts to regain order. He was a figure of scorn, a public display of his own deficiencies. A deep, wrenching ache settled in his chest. He was kind-hearted, genuinely eager to learn, to prove his mettle. A quiet resilience, a steadfastness, lay hidden beneath his shyness. Yet here, on this block, it all remained unseen. All they perceived was the callow youth, the untested commodity. His gaze drifted across the dusty street, past the false-fronted buildings, searching for a sign, any glimmer, that his luck hadn't entirely run dry. Just as Hemlock prepared to concede to the paltry $3 bid, a new sound cleaved through the suffocating quiet, a distant clatter of hooves, steadily intensifying, accompanied by the distinctive squeal of carriage wheels. Every head swiveled. Even Hemlock paused mid-sentence, mouth agape. A sleek, obsidian carriage, polished to a mirror sheen, rounded the corner of Main Street. It was unlike anything Redemption typically witnessed, elegant, refined, drawn by 2 magnificent, high-stepping bays whose coats gleamed like burnished jet. The driver, a stern man in a crisp uniform, handled the reins with practiced precision. The carriage drew to a graceful halt directly before the auction block, stirring a golden shimmer of dust in the sunlight. A profound silence descended, speaking volumes of the crowd's awe and bewilderment. The driver dismounted, opening the carriage door with a flourish. From within emerged a woman. She moved with an inherent grace, her presence instantly commanding the space. Her gown, a deep emerald green, was cut from a fabric that caught the light with every subtle undulation, hinting at quiet opulence and exquisite taste. A wide-brimmed hat, adorned with a single, tasteful feather, shadowed her face, yet Silas discerned the delicate curve of her jaw, the suggestion of a strong, intelligent profile. She surveyed the scene with an air of calm assessment. Her eyes, though partially obscured, seemed to absorb every detail: the dusty thoroughfare, the curious townsfolk, the bewildered auctioneer, and Silas, still perched awkwardly on the block. There was no judgment in her gaze, merely a composed, perceptive observation. She exuded an aura of reserved authority, an understated elegance utterly incongruous with redemption's raw landscape. Her arrival sparked a ripple, then a wave, of whispers entirely different from those Silas had endured moments earlier. Who is she? Never seen her kind here before. Must be Eleanor Vance. The widow from the East. Eleanor Vance. The name hung in the air, a whisper of old money, of a distant, more cultivated world. She took a step closer, her gaze finally settling on Silas. For a fleeting instant, their eyes connected. Silas felt a jolt, a strange blend of apprehension and something akin to burgeoning hope. Her expression remained enigmatic, yet a depth in her eyes hinted at a keen intellect and an observant spirit. A nervous flutter stirred in his stomach, a novel sensation divorced from shame and entirely linked to the striking woman now standing before him. The auction, his very destiny, suddenly felt balanced precariously on a knife's edge. A surprising bid. The collective gasp that rippled through the auction square was almost audible. It wasn't the sound of an approaching storm or the sudden flight of pigeons, but the stunned silence that followed Eleanor Vance's clear, resonant voice. $500, she declared, her words cutting through the derisive chuckles like a freshly honed blade. The auctioneer, a portly man named Jedediah who usually prided himself on his unflappable demeanor, sputtered. His gavel, poised to strike for a measly $2, hovered mid-air, forgotten. The crowd, a moment ago a cacophony of sneers and whispers, was utterly silenced. Even the dust seemed to settle in deference. Silas, still reeling from the public humiliation, felt his jaw go slack. $500? For him? He was worth less than a decent saddle, certainly not the price of a small herd. He glanced at Eleanor, her posture regal, her gaze steady, almost amused by the chaos she'd wrought. A faint blush crept up his neck, a mix of embarrassment and an unfamiliar flutter in his chest. What did a woman like her want with a greenhorn like him? Jedediah finally found his voice, albeit a little hoarse. Did you say 500, ma'am? Eleanor offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. I believe I did, Mr. Abernathy. Is there a problem? No problem at all, ma'am. Highest bid by far. Going once, going twice. Sold. To the lovely Mrs. Vance. The gavel struck with a sharp crack that echoed in the sudden quiet. Silas was unceremoniously nudged off the block by a grinning stable hand. He stumbled, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. He was sold. To her. He felt a strange mixture of relief that the torment was over and dread at what this unexpected turn of events might entail. Eleanor approached him, her long, elegant skirt rustling softly. Her eyes, the color of warm honey, met his. Silas Meadowsweet, I believe, she asked, her voice melodious, without a trace of the condescension he'd come to expect. Yes, ma'am, he mumbled, his cheeks burning. He felt like a gawky colt presented for inspection. Well, Silas, she continued, a hint of something unreadable in her expression, it appears you're coming with me. My carriage awaits. The journey to her ranch was unlike anything Silas had ever experienced. The carriage was a marvel of craftsmanship, polished wood, plush velvet seats, and windows that offered a framed view of the familiar, yet suddenly distant, landscape. Eleanor sat opposite him, observing him with an unnerving intensity that made him acutely aware of his worn jeans and dusty boots. He tried to focus on the passing scenery, the rolling hills and sparse mesquite, but his mind kept circling back to her. She smelled faintly of lavender and something else, something expensive and refined. As they ascended a winding drive, the world began to transform. The humble shacks and sun-baked fields gave way to meticulously manicured lawns and towering oak trees. Then, through a break in the foliage, Silas saw it. Eleanor's ranch was less a ranch and more a sprawling estate. A grand, two-story house of pale stone, adorned with intricate ironwork balconies, stood proudly against the azure sky. A wide, shaded veranda wrapped around its front, and blooming rose bushes lined the path to its massive oak front door. Barns, larger and more imposing than any he'd ever seen, formed a neat cluster nearby, their timber polished to a rich sheen. Fences, freshly painted white, stretched into the distance, enclosing paddocks where horses, sleek and powerful, grazed. "Welcome to Vance Manor, Silas," Eleanor said, her voice pulling him from his awestruck stupor. There was a subtle irony in her tone, as if she anticipated his reaction. He could only gape. His own home, a two-room cabin built by his father, could fit inside her living room. This wasn't just a step up, it was a leap across a chasm he hadn't even known existed. A stable hand, impeccably dressed, appeared as the carriage drew to a halt, opening the door with a practiced flourish. Stepping out onto the gravel drive, Silas felt the disparity between them even more acutely. He was a speck of dust, she a star. He glanced at her, wondering again, with a fresh wave of bewilderment, why she had chosen him. What possible use could a woman of such immense wealth and refinement have for a country boy with nothing but a willingness to work and a heart full of unfulfilled dreams? Eleanor led the way up the steps, her posture graceful, her every movement radiating an effortless command. She paused at the top, turning to face him. "Silas," she said, her expression softening, "I imagine you have many questions. And perhaps, a few concerns." He nodded mutely, feeling the weight of the manor's grandeur pressing down on him. "Rest assured," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "I did not buy you for sport. I have a proposition for you, one that I believe will benefit us both. But first, a meal, and then perhaps, a bath. You look as though you've had a rather trying day." A ghost of a smile touched her lips, and for the first time, Silas felt a flicker of something other than confusion, a hesitant spark of curiosity about the woman who had so unexpectedly, and dramatically, altered the course of his life. Roses and hidden talents. The scent of polished wood and unfamiliar spices clung to Silas like a second skin, a stark contrast to the familiar aroma of sun-baked earth and horse sweat he'd known all his life. Vance Manor was less a home and more a monument to wealth, its vast rooms echoing with an oppressive silence that made him long for the lively clatter of the ranch kitchen and the barking of his father's hounds. He'd been given a small, impeccably clean room in the servants' wing, a space far grander than his entire cabin back home. The feather mattress was a cloud, but sleep eluded him, his mind a whirlwind of Eleanor's dazzling presence and the dizzying turn his life had taken. He was a ranch hand, a cowboy, used to breaking horses and mending fences, not navigating hushed corridors and dining on fine china under the watchful eyes of silent house staff. Every meal was an ordeal, every conversation with Eleanor a tightrope walk between politeness and his own inherent awkwardness. She was unfailingly gracious, her eyes sparkling with an unreadable amusement, but Silas felt perpetually off-kilter, a bull in a parlor, acutely aware of his calloused hands and plain speech. Eleanor, sensing his discomfort, had given him a task that surprised him. "Silas," she'd said one morning, finding him awkwardly polishing a bridle he'd borrowed from the stables. "My rose garden needs attention. The old gardener retired last season, and the new one hasn't quite captured their spirit. Would you mind? Roses. Not horses, not fences, but delicate, thorny roses." Silas, though bewildered, nodded. He found the garden a riot of color and fragrance, a world away from the manor's imposing interior. Here, the air was sweet with perfume, and the buzzing of bees was the only sound. Armed with a pair of shears and a well-worn book on rose care, he approached the task with an earnest diligence. He learned to distinguish between a spent bloom and a burgeoning bud, to prune with precision, encouraging new growth while safeguarding the plant's vitality. He discovered the subtle variations in their velvety petals, the deep crimson of black baccara, the creamy blush of Eden, the vibrant yellow of Graham Thomas. Hours melted away as he meticulously deadheaded, mulched, and watered, his hands, usually so adept with rope and leather, now moving with a surprising gentleness. The rhythmic work was a balm to his restless spirit, a quiet communion with something beautiful and enduring. He found a deep satisfaction in coaxing life from the soil, in transforming a tangled thicket into an orderly display. One afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of apricot and rose, Silas sat on a stone bench at the edge of the garden, a small leather-bound sketchbook open on his knee. He wasn't aware of Eleanor's approach until her shadow fell across the page. "Working hard, Silas?" Her voice was soft, devoid of her usual polite reserve. He startled, his cheeks flushing. "Ma'am. Just taking a break." He tried to close the book, but her hand rested lightly on his arm, a feather-light touch that sent a jolt through him. "May I see?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the page. Reluctantly, he kept the sketchbook open. On the page was a finely detailed sketch of one of her prize stallions, its powerful musculature rendered with surprising accuracy, its mane a wild tangle of lines. Below it, a lighter, more delicate rendering of a cluster of half-opened rosebuds. Eleanor studied the drawings, a slow smile spreading across her lips. "These are remarkable, Silas." Her voice held a note of genuine surprise. "I had no idea." She traced the outline of a horse's flank with a slender finger. "The spirit you've captured, it's almost alive." Silas mumbled, "Just a hobby, ma'am. Been drawing since I was a boy. Never showed anyone." "And why not?" Her eyes, usually so composed, held a spark of intrigue. She looked from the sketches to Silas, a new appraisal in her gaze. She saw the quiet intensity in his eyes, the subtle strength in his hands that had nurtured her roses, and now, the unexpected artistry. He was more than just a bewildered country boy, more than just a ranch hand. There was a depth to him, a sensitivity she hadn't anticipated. "There's a world in you, Silas Meadowsweet," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper against the rustling leaves. "A world I'm only just beginning to see." The setting sun cast long shadows, painting them both in a warm, golden light as a comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. For the first time since arriving at Vance Manor, Silas felt a flicker of ease, a sense of being truly seen. And Eleanor, watching the blush deepen on his tanned cheeks, felt a quiet thrill of discovery. This arrangement, she realized, might prove far more interesting than she'd initially imagined. Whispers and defiance. The clatter of hooves and the rumble of wagon wheels were usually the soundtrack to a peaceful Saturday in Oakhaven. But today, a different kind of noise permeated the air, the sharp, insistent hum of gossip. It began, as most unpleasant things did, at the general store, where Mr. Cranky held court by the pickle barrel. His face, already prone to a perpetual scowl, was twisted into an expression of malicious glee as he leaned in to share his latest pronouncement with anyone within earshot. "Heard tell," Mr. Cranky drawled, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "that Widow Vance, bless her haughty heart, bought herself a ranch hand. Not just any ranch hand, mind you. One of them auction boys. Paid a pretty penny for him, too, they say." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air like stale tobacco smoke. "Some folks are saying she did it just to spite me, after I offered her a fair price for a fella what could actually work. Guess she prefers prettier things." A snicker rippled through the small crowd, followed by a few murmurs of agreement. Mr. Cranky puffed out his chest, emboldened. "She's always been one for show, that Eleanor Vance. Reckon she just wanted to parade him around, make a fool of the rest of us honest ranchers." Silas, on a rare trip into town for some garden supplies, felt the words hit him with the force of a thrown stone. He had been admiring a display of freshly baked bread, the sweet scent a pleasant distraction, when the insidious whispers began. His heart, which had been light and contented since his days in Eleanor's rose garden, now plummeted. He felt a hot flush creep up his neck, a familiar wave of shame washing over him. To be spoken of so dismissively, so cruelly, it was a harsh reminder of his former status, a commodity to be bought and sold. But more than his own hurt, it was the casual disrespect aimed at Eleanor that truly stung. He gripped the small sack of seed packets in his hand, his knuckles white. He knew he was inexperienced, a bit green around the edges, but he was no fool, and he certainly wasn't a plaything. The accusations against Eleanor, painting her as a cruel, calculating woman, were a distortion of the truth he had come to know. She was kind, thoughtful, and possessed a quiet dignity that Mr. Cranky, with his petty jealousies, could never comprehend. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Silas pushed through the sparse crowd, his worn boots making barely a sound on the dusty wooden floor. Mr. Cranky, still holding forth, didn't notice him until Silas stood directly in front of him, his usually gentle eyes now narrowed with a quiet fury. The conversation around the pickle barrel died, replaced by an uneasy silence. "Mr. Cranky," Silas said, his voice, usually soft, now held a surprising edge. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the air, demanding attention. "I believe you're mistaken." Mr. Cranky blinked, taken aback by the unexpected confrontation. He straightened, his eyes narrowing. "Mistaken about what, boy? About the widow Vance buying herself a decoration?" He sneered, his gaze sweeping over Silas's simple, clean clothes. Silas refused to flinch. "You're mistaken about Mrs. Vance's intentions. And about my purpose at Vance Manor." He felt a tremor in his hands, but he forced himself to stand tall. "Mrs. Vance offered me work, honest work, when I had nothing. She treats me with respect, something you clearly know nothing about. And she certainly didn't acquire me to spite anyone." His gaze held Mr. Cranky's, unwavering. "She's a good woman, and you have no right to spread such vicious lies about her." A ripple of surprise went through the onlookers. Silas, the shy ranch hand, was standing up to Mr. Cranky, the notoriously ill-tempered rancher. Mr. Cranky's face mottled with indignation. "Why, you insolent whelp! You dare contradict me? You're just a charity case, boy." A greenhorn she took pity on. Perhaps, Silas conceded, a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, but it was quickly overshadowed by defiance. "But charity or not, I work hard for Mrs. Vance. And I'm loyal to her. Which is more than can be said for someone who spends his time tearing down others." He took a step closer, his voice dropping slightly, but no less firm. "Leave Mrs. Vance out of your petty squabbles, Mr. Cranky. She deserves better than your slander." With that, Silas turned on his heel, leaving a stunned Mr. Cranky and a thoroughly surprised general store behind him. He walked out into the sunlight, his heart still pounding, but a strange sense of exhilaration bubbling within him. He hadn't backed down. He had stood up for Eleanor. He bought his supplies at the hardware store, his mind still replaying the confrontation. As he loaded the bags into the buggy, he saw Eleanor's elegant carriage approaching, the horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. She pulled up alongside him, her expression calm and composed as ever. "Silas," she greeted, her voice a soft melody. "I didn't expect to see you in town today." She paused, her perceptive eyes studying his face. "Is everything quite all right? You look a little animated." A faint blush touched Silas's cheeks. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Vance," he said, trying to sound casual, but a small, proud smile played on his lips. He knew he couldn't keep it from her. "Actually, I had a bit of a run-in with Mr. Cranky." Eleanor's eyebrows arched subtly. "Oh? And what did that old grumbler have to say for himself?" Silas recounted the exchange, choosing his words carefully, downplaying his own bravery but not the accusations leveled against her. As he spoke, he watched Eleanor's face. He expected anger, perhaps frustration, but what he saw instead was a slow, gentle smile spreading across her lips, a warmth radiating from her eyes that made his heart beat a little faster. "And you defended my honor?" she asked, a hint of amusement in her voice, but a profound sincerity in her gaze. Silas nodded, his cheeks growing warmer. "I couldn't let him speak ill of you, Mrs. Vance. It wasn't right." Eleanor reached out, her gloved hand resting lightly on his arm for a brief moment. The touch sent a jolt through him. "Silas," she said, her voice soft, "you are a remarkable young man. More remarkable than you give yourself credit for." She paused, her eyes sparkling. "And I must say, it's rather invigorating to have someone willing to stand up for me. Especially when that someone is you." He met her gaze, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the sun. He had never felt so seen, so appreciated. In her eyes, he wasn't a charity case, or a decoration, but something far more valuable. And in that moment, he knew he would face 100 Mr. Crankies if it meant earning her approval. The whispers of Oakhaven might persist, but they were powerless against the quiet strength of his conviction and the burgeoning connection between them. A dinner invitation. The late afternoon sun, already a molten orb sinking towards the western hills, streaked the stable yard with long, lengthening shadows. Silas, the adrenaline of confrontation still humming beneath his skin, methodically groomed Chestnut. The rhythmic whisper of the curry comb across the horse's coat was a soothing balm to his jangled nerves. He hadn't anticipated the quiet surge of triumph as Mr. Cranky retreated, nor the subtle, appreciative curve of Eleanor's lips. He'd acted honorably, both for her and for himself. A soft cough rippled through the air, breaking his focus. He turned to find Eleanor poised at the stable door, her form silhouetted by the gilded light. She wore a plain, dark green dress, yet even in its simplicity, it conveyed a graceful, understated elegance. "Silas," she began, her voice a gentle current in the hushed air, I am truly grateful for what you did today." A blush warmed Silas's neck. "Just doing what was right, ma'am." He dropped his gaze, suddenly fixated on a loose buckle on the bridle. "Perhaps," she continued, a flicker of amusement in her tone, "you would permit me to express my gratitude in a more suitable fashion?" She paused. "I'm hosting dinner tonight. A modest affair, but I would be honored if you joined me." Silas's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Dinner? With her? In her grand house? He recalled a fleeting glimpse of her dining room, a blur of polished mahogany and shimmering silver. His heart began a nervous drumbeat against his ribs. "Ma'am, he looked down at his dust-caked work clothes, his calloused hands. "I don't rightly own anything appropriate. And I ain't much for fancy meals." Eleanor's smile softened. "Nonsense, Silas. Your company is all the suitability I require. And as for fancy, it will simply be a meal shared between friends." 7 o'clock? He swallowed, the word friends lingering in the air like the ghost of a summer rain. "Yes, ma'am. 7 o'clock. Later, in his cramped room, Silas scrutinized his reflection in the dim mirror. His worn denim shirt and trousers, his sole presentable attire, seemed to mock his aspirations. He'd scrubbed his hands raw, battling the ingrained dirt, and slicked his unruly hair with water, yet he still looked like a cowboy who'd wandered in off the range, not a dinner guest. A knot of anxiety tightened in his gut. He'd never sat at a proper dinner table, much less one belonging to a woman like Eleanor Vance. He envisioned other guests, effortlessly elegant, their eyes silently dissecting his every awkward movement. What if he grabbed the wrong fork? What if he spilled something? He took a deep breath, trying to still his trembling hands as he tucked in his shirt. He was Silas Meadowsweet, a man who understood horses and roses, not societal subtleties. But Eleanor had asked him. And he wouldn't let her down. Precisely at 7, Silas stood before the imposing double doors of the manor, his heart a frantic hummingbird. He knocked, a timid rap that seemed absorbed by the vast silence. The door glided open to reveal Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, her expression a blend of surprise and a faint, almost imperceptible, approval. "Mr. Meadowsweet," she said, her voice unexpectedly gentle. "Mrs. Vance is expecting you." She guided him through a hushed hallway, past gleaming portraits and antique furniture that seemed to hum with forgotten stories. The air was warm, subtly scented with beeswax and a whisper of blossoms. Then, they were in the dining room. It was exactly as he'd imagined, and yet somehow more overwhelming. A long, polished mahogany table commanded the space, adorned with an intricate constellation of sparkling crystal and gleaming silverware. A single candelabra at the center cast a warm, flickering light, making the room glow with an inviting warmth. Eleanor stood by the fireplace, a vision in a deep sapphire gown that shimmered like moonlight on water. She looked regal, almost ethereal. Silas felt his own inadequacy acutely. His simple clothes were a stark, glaring contrast to the room's opulent splendor. He wanted to turn and vanish. But then Eleanor smiled, a genuine, welcoming curve of her lips that reached her intelligent eyes. "Silas," she said, her voice a lifeline cutting through his apprehension. "Please, come in. I'm so glad you could make it." He shuffled forward, acutely aware of every scuff his boots made against the plush Persian rug. "Ma'am," he mumbled, his voice a little hoarse. "Please, sit here," she gestured to the chair directly opposite her at the table, a place of honor. He pulled it out, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the heavy wood, and sat stiffly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He glanced at the bewildering array of forks and knives, a silent panic beginning to unfurl. Eleanor seemed to intuit his discomfort. "It's just us tonight, Silas," she said, her tone reassuring. "No need for formalities. Mrs. Gable has prepared a simple roast, nothing too grand." She paused, her gaze resting on him, warm and utterly uncritical. "You know, Silas, your loyalty today, it meant a great deal to me. More than you can possibly imagine." His shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. Her words were a soft blanket, easing the chill of his self-consciousness. He looked across the gleaming table at her, the candlelight softening the angles of her face, highlighting the kindness in her eyes. He might be a simple cowboy in a fancy room, but in that moment, with Eleanor's steady gaze upon him, he didn't feel quite so out of place. He felt seen. And for the first time in a long while, he felt truly valued. "Thank you, ma'am," he managed, a genuine smile finally touching his lips. It was an honor. The storm and the rescue. The sky, a placid blue all morning, curdled into a bruised purple by late afternoon. A strange, heavy stillness descended upon the Vance ranch, the kind that precedes a raw wound in the earth. Silas, tending to a stubborn patch of weeds near the stable, felt the shift deep in his bones. The air grew thick and electric, prickling his skin. Then, as if a giant hand had ripped the heavens open, the storm broke. It wasn't a gentle rain, it was a deluge. Fat drops became sheets, driven by a wind that shrieked like a banshee through the eaves of the manor. Silas barely made it inside the stable before the world outside dissolved into a gray, churning chaos. He watched, mesmerized and a little unnerved, as branches whipped against the windowpanes, and the newly laid gravel in the driveway transformed into a rushing stream. The horses, usually placid, whinnied nervously in their stalls, stomping their hooves. Eleanor appeared shortly after, her elegant figure silhouetted against the swirling gloom of the stable entrance. She wore a practical riding skirt and a sturdy wool shawl, her expression taut with concern. "Silas, are the animals secure?" she asked, her voice a little strained above the wind's howl. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, checking the latch on a stall door one last time. "Everyone's accounted for here." A stable hand, a wiry man named Jed, stumbled in, his oilskin slick with rain, his face pale. Miss Vance," he stammered, breathless, "the north pasture, the fence is down. I think some of the yearlings got out." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, a rare display of alarm. "The new heifers? Oh, no. Not in this tempest." Her gaze darted to the window, where the storm raged with undiminished fury. The heifers, a recent purchase, were a valuable addition to her herd, but more than that, she cared for the welfare of her animals. Silas felt a familiar tightening in his gut, a mix of adrenaline and quiet determination. His eyes followed Eleanor's, scanning the blurred landscape beyond the stable. He pictured the young cattle, disoriented and vulnerable in the maelstrom. "How many, Jed?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tempest. Jed wrung his hands. "Couldn't get a clear count, Silas. Maybe 4 or 5. The wind, it's a beast." Eleanor paced a small circle, her brow furrowed. "It's too dangerous to go out now, Jed. We'll have to wait until it passes." Her voice was laced with regret, but also a firm logic. Silas, however, felt a different kind of logic stirring within him. He remembered nights on the trail, the desperate search for a stray calf, the raw instinct to protect. He looked at Eleanor, her worry palpable, and then back at the violent downpour. Waiting might mean losing them for good, swept away by flash floods, or worse, succumbing to exposure. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a little lower than usual, "with respect, if we wait, they could be miles away. Or worse, injured." He paused, gathering his courage. "I can go." Eleanor stopped pacing, turning sharply to face him. Her eyes, usually so composed, widened slightly. "Silas, don't be absurd. You'd be putting yourself in grave danger. Look at that wind. You could be thrown from your horse, struck by lightning. It's simply not worth the risk." "They're your cattle, ma'am," Silas countered, his gaze unwavering. "And I'm your ranch hand. It's my duty." He wasn't thinking about duty as much as he was thinking about the animals, about Eleanor's distress, about the quiet pride he felt in being capable. The wild, untamed part of him, the cowboy who had spent years facing the elements, asserted itself. Eleanor studied him, a complex mix of emotions playing across her face, concern, frustration, and perhaps, a flicker of something else, something akin to admiration. "Silas, it's not a request. I forbid it." "I understand your concern, ma'am," Silas said, already moving towards the tack room. He began pulling down a heavy saddle, his movements deliberate and focused. "But I've ridden in worse. I know these lands, even in the dark." He glanced at Jed. "Jed, get my horse, Buck, ready. And pack a lantern, if it'll stay lit, and some rope." Jed hesitated, looking from Silas to Eleanor, clearly torn. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice softer now, less commanding, more pleading. "Silas, please. Think of yourself. I wouldn't forgive myself if something happened to you." Silas paused, his hand on Buck's bridle. He met her gaze, and for a fleeting moment, the storm outside seemed to fade. He saw her genuine worry, a warmth he hadn't expected. "I'll be careful, ma'am," he promised, a slight tremor in his voice. "I always am." He pulled a sturdy, broad-brimmed hat low over his eyes, securing it with a leather thong under his chin. He adjusted his worn leather jacket, feeling its familiar weight. As Jed led Buck out, the horse snorting nervously at the tempest, Silas turned back to Eleanor. "They won't be far. I'll bring them back." He didn't wait for another protest, knowing she wouldn't stop him now. He swung himself into the saddle, the familiar leather a comfort beneath him. With a nod that was both respectful and resolute, he spurred Buck into the churning gray maw of the storm, vanishing into the driving rain and the wind's mournful cry. Eleanor watched him go, a hand pressed to her chest, the roar of the storm suddenly feeling very, very empty. Triumph and realizations. The wind howled a final, mournful dirge, then began to recede, leaving behind a world scoured clean and dripping. Eleanor stood at the drawing-room window, the storm's lingering chill seeping into her bones despite the roaring fire. Her gaze was fixed on the eastern pasture, a muddy expanse where the first faint blush of dawn was attempting to break through the bruised clouds. Hours had passed since Silas rode out, each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall a hammer blow against her frayed nerves. She'd tried to read, to distract herself with ledgers, but her mind spun with images of him, small against the fury of nature. Then, a movement at the edge of the tree line. A dark shape, then another, emerging from the skeletal silhouettes of the cottonwoods. Her breath hitched. First one cow, head down, plowing through the mud. Then two. 3. And behind them, a rider, a silhouette against the gray light, slumped but resolute. Silas. Eleanor didn't wait. She gathered her skirts and practically ran through the manor, her heart hammering a wild rhythm against her ribs. She flung open the back door, the cold, damp air a shock to her face, but she barely registered it. He was there, riding slowly towards the corral, his hat brim low, water streaming from the soaked felt. The heifers, muddy and bedraggled but undeniably present, milled around him. All of them. He dismounted stiffly, his movements betraying exhaustion, and began to open the corral gate. He didn't seem to notice her at first, his focus entirely on his task. His clothes clung to him, heavy with rain and mud, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked utterly spent, yet there was a quiet triumph in the set of his shoulders. Silas. Her voice was rough with emotion she hadn't known she possessed. He startled, turning his head slowly. His eyes, though weary, held a spark of surprise, then something soft and almost shy as he met her gaze. A streak of mud ran across his cheek, mirroring the streaks on the heifers he'd just saved. "Ma'am," he rasped, his voice hoarse, a faint tremor in it. "Got 'em all." Eleanor walked towards him, her boots sinking slightly into the churned earth. She stopped a few feet away, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The sheer relief that washed over her was so profound it left her lightheaded. But beneath it, a powerful wave of admiration swelled. He had ridden into that maelstrom, defied her orders, risked everything, and emerged victorious. For her. For her ranch. "You foolish, magnificent man," she breathed, a small, involuntary smile touching her lips. "You could have been killed." He ducked his head, a faint flush creeping up his mud-streaked neck. "Couldn't leave 'em out there, ma'am. Too much good blood." "Good blood," she echoed, her eyes sweeping over the bedraggled but unharmed cattle, then back to him. "And what about your own good blood, Silas? Did you not consider that?" He finally looked at her fully, his expression earnest, almost bewildered by her intensity. "It was my job, ma'am. And, well, it felt right." The sincerity in his tired eyes, the quiet strength that had carried him through the night, resonated deep within her. It wasn't just the cattle he'd saved, it was something inside her, something that had been dormant for too long, that he had rekindled. As he stood there, shivering slightly in the biting wind, a profound realization settled over Eleanor, clear and undeniable as the dawn. She had missed him. Truly and terribly missed him. The emptiness in the manor when he was gone had been more than just the absence of a ranch hand, it had been the absence of him. His quiet presence, his gentle observations, the way his eyes would light up when he talked about the roses, the steadfast loyalty that shone in his every action. Eleanor Vance, who had believed her heart was a carefully guarded vault, felt it crack open. The feelings that surged through her were undeniably strong, vibrant, and utterly unexpected. They were feelings she'd mourned and buried with her late husband, feelings she'd long since consigned to the past. But here they were, blossoming anew, as resilient and unexpected as a wildflower pushing through barren earth. She realized, with a startling clarity that left her breathless, that she was falling in love with Silas Meadowsweet. "Come inside, Silas," she said, her voice softer than she'd intended. "You need a hot bath and something warm to eat." She didn't wait for his reply, but turned, walking back towards the manor, leaving him to secure the gate. As she ascended the steps, she risked a glance back. He was watching her, a curious, hesitant expression on his face, a man who had faced down a storm, but was perhaps, just perhaps, beginning to glimpse another, entirely different kind of tempest brewing. Under a starry sky. The rich perfume of damp earth and night-blooming jasmine, a sweet counterpoint to the distant lowing of the settled herd, perfumed the air. A full moon, a lustrous pearl against the inky canvas, draped the yard in long, silver shadows, lending an otherworldly cast to familiar objects. Eleanor stood by the porch railing, her gaze lost in the vast expanse of the prairie, yet her thoughts remained anchored to the man beside her. Silas, though now clean, still wore the faint creases of his workday attire as he leaned against a porch post, his profile softened by the nearby lantern's gentle glow. The day's storm-wrought tension had yielded to a profound, almost fragile quietude. "You truly saved them all, Silas," Eleanor murmured, her voice a soft ripple against the immense silence of the night. "Every single one." Silas shifted, his dark eyes, like shadowed pools in the faint light, flickered to hers before modestly receding. "It was the right thing to do, ma'am. They needed help. Even when I told you not to go." A faint, fleeting smile, a ghost of amusement that didn't quite touch her eyes, graced her lips. He hesitated, then met her gaze with an uncharacteristic steadiness. "Especially then. Someone had to look out for them." A profound warmth bloomed within Eleanor, a feeling akin to the first flush of dawn. It wasn't just his courage that stirred her, but his quiet conviction, his unwavering moral compass. He was a man who lived by an innate code of honor, unburdened by self-interest or societal judgment. "Silas," she began, her voice thickening with an emotion she hadn't intended to voice. She drew a deep, steadying breath, the cool night air filling her lungs. "What you did, it reminded me of something crucial." She turned fully to face him, the moonlight sculpting her elegant silhouette. "This ranch, this entire life, it was merely an empty vessel after my husband passed. I continued out of habit, out of duty, but the heart had withered. And so had mine." Silas listened, his eyes wide and unblinking, his breathing barely perceptible. He held himself utterly still, as if any movement might shatter the delicate moment. Eleanor took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "Then you arrived. And you breathed life back into this place. You coaxed beauty from the roses, and a quiet strength into the daily work. You brought something back to me." Her voice trembled slightly on the last words, a rare tremor of vulnerability. "Silas, you are not merely an employee. You are more. So much more." She extended a hand, her fingers hovering for a breath before gently cupping his cheek. His skin was warm beneath her touch, faintly rough from the day's toils. I care for you, Silas. More deeply than I ever believed possible again." Silas's breath hitched. His heart, a frantic drumbeat since she began to speak, now hammered against his ribs like a captive bird. The world shrank to encompass only her face, bathed in the benevolent moonlight, and the delicate pressure of her hand. He swallowed hard, his throat suddenly parched. He had never dared to imagine such words, never dreamed of such a connection. He had admired her, respected her, felt a profound, almost adoring loyalty, but this was an entirely new sensation, both terrifying and exhilarating. "Ma'am." "Eleanor," he managed, his voice a low, husky whisper. He reached up, his hand trembling as he covered hers, pressing it more firmly against his skin. I feel it too." His gaze, usually so modest, now held hers with an intensity that startled them both. I never thought. I mean, you're so wonderful. And I'm just, he trailed off, his ingrained insecurity threatening to surface. Eleanor's thumb gently caressed his cheek. You're everything, Silas. You're honest and brave and kind. You perceive the world with a gentleness that most men miss. You make me laugh. You make me feel alive. He leaned into her touch, his eyes glistening in the moonlight. And you, Eleanor, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, you saved me. From everything. You gave me purpose. You gave me a home. You gave me hope. He leaned closer, drawn by an irresistible current, by the raw honesty in her eyes, by the soft scent of her perfume mingling with the night air. His heart thrummed a ceaseless drumroll in his ears. Eleanor watched him, her own heart soaring, a lightness she hadn't known possible filling her chest. She saw the uncertainty in his eyes, the shyness, but beneath it, a powerful, unspoken yearning that mirrored her own. As he drew nearer, she closed the small distance between them, her gaze dropping to his mouth, then back to his earnest, vulnerable eyes. He paused, just inches away, his breath warm on her lips, seeking unspoken permission. Eleanor offered it, a silent invitation in her gaze. Then, his lips, soft and hesitant, met hers. It was a gentle touch, tentative at first, like the first dewdrop on a rose petal. A soft, warm spark ignited between them, a silent declaration of all that had been unspoken, all that had been growing between them in quiet moments, in shared glances, in steadfast loyalty. It was a kiss that promised not fireworks, but a steady, enduring flame, a connection forged in respect and admiration, now blossoming into something deeper, something profoundly tender, under the vast, watchful eye of the starry sky. A new beginning. Eleanor's lavender perfume still perfumed Silas's shirt, a delicate counterpoint to the street's grit and horsesweat as they walked into town. His fingers sought hers, weaving together in a familiar clasp, at once possessive and protective. The unspoken question of their unconventional pairing hummed beneath Cottonwood Creek's midday clamor. Silas felt a familiar flush creep up his neck, but this time, it carried a spark of newfound assurance. He wasn't merely a ranch hand, he was Eleanor Vance's chosen companion. They approached the general store, the town's unofficial sounding board for gossip, where a small cluster of townsfolk had gathered. Mrs. Gable, the baker, haggled over flour prices with Mr. Henderson, the blacksmith, while young Timmy playfully chased a wooden hoop. As Eleanor and Silas drew near, a noticeable quiet descended. Heads swiveled, eyes widened, and a low murmur began to ripple through the group. Eleanor, with her innate grace, gave Silas's hand a gentle squeeze before releasing it. Her voice, clear and resonant, carried easily. "Good morning, everyone." She paused, her gaze sweeping over their faces, some curious, others openly astonished. "Silas and I have some news we wish to share." Turning to him, a soft smile graced her lips, and Silas felt a profound warmth expand in his chest. "We are very happy to announce that we are together." A stunned silence followed. Mrs. Gable, startled, dropped a sack of sugar, which burst open with a soft thud, scattering white crystals across the boardwalk. Mr. Henderson's jaw slackened, his pipe forgotten in his hand. Timmy, oblivious, continued his game. Then, a voice shattered the stillness. "Well, I'll be," exclaimed Old Man Tucker, usually prone only to grumbling about his back. A slow grin stretched across his weathered face. "Took you long enough, Eleanor. Always knew that boy had a good heart." He winked at Silas, whose ears burned anew. Not everyone echoed Tucker's enthusiasm. Abigail Miller, who had always regarded Eleanor with a mixture of envy and suspicion, sniffed audibly. "A ranch hand, Eleanor? Really?" Her tone dripped with thinly veiled disdain. Eleanor merely raised an eyebrow, a silent challenge in her gaze. "Indeed, Abigail. A remarkable man, I've found." Her hand subtly found Silas's again, a quiet, defiant gesture that spoke volumes. "I think it's wonderful," chirped Sarah Jenkins, a young seamstress who often admired Silas's quiet demeanor from afar. "You both look so happy." The reactions varied, a kaleidoscope of surprise, skepticism, and genuine warmth. Silas met each gaze, his chin held a little higher than before. He knew the depth of his feelings for Eleanor, and her hand in his was all the affirmation he needed. They spent the rest of the morning running errands, their news preceding them like an expanding ripple. By the time they headed back to the ranch, all of Cottonwood Creek buzzed with the story of Eleanor Vance and her cowboy. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of shared purpose and burgeoning joy. The ranch, once a place of quiet solitude for Eleanor, now often echoed with their laughter. Silas, no longer simply a hired hand, worked alongside her, his knowledge of the land deepening with each passing season. He still cultivated the roses, their vibrant blooms a testament to his devoted care, but he also rode herd, mended fences, and helped chart the ranch's future. The greenhorn cowboy was a fading memory, supplanted by a capable, confident rancher. Evenings unfolded on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues. Eleanor would read aloud from her treasured books, her voice a soothing balm, while Silas, sprawled in a comfortable chair, listened, occasionally offering a thoughtful observation. They spoke of everything and nothing, their conversations weaving a rich tapestry of shared dreams and intimate confessions. One particularly blustery afternoon, a sudden gust of wind tore a section of roof off the old barn, sending shingles scattering. Silas, without an instant's hesitation, sprang into action. He was up the ladder, hammering new planks into place as Eleanor watched from below, handing him tools and offering encouragement. His movements were swift and sure, his hands calloused and strong. There was no trace of the shy, awkward boy who had first arrived. As the last shingle was secured, he looked down at her, his face smudged with dirt but alight with satisfaction. Eleanor smiled up at him, a deep, abiding affection warming her eyes. "You truly are indispensable, Silas Meadowsweet," she said, her voice soft. He descended the ladder, pulling her into a warm embrace. "And you, Eleanor Vance, are my everything." He kissed her then, a tender, lingering kiss that tasted of sunshine and honest labor. Their life together was a testament to love's quiet power. The rose garden flourished under Silas's devoted hand, each bloom a vibrant symbol of their blossoming affection. Eleanor found herself humming more often, her steps lighter, her spirit renewed. The loneliness that had shadowed her after her husband's passing had receded, replaced by the warmth of Silas's unwavering love and companionship. The ranch, once a poignant reminder of loss, was now a vibrant home, filled with the promise of a shared future. They were no longer merely a wealthy widow and her ranch hand, they were Eleanor and Silas, two souls intertwined, building a beautiful life, one day, one laugh, one loving touch at a time. The town might have harbored initial reservations, but the undeniable happiness radiating from the Vance ranch was a language everyone understood.